Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Morning, Matt.
Morning.
It's
going to be a warm day today, so it's
nice
it is nice to get up early and
it is going to
be
be a warm
fresh.
day, and it's the
for a discussion.
second day of a new year as well.
It is. That's right.
My goodness me. The years go by fast. I remember going to see the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey with my dad and thinking we are never going to get there.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are now, and
that's right.
It's 2023.
We were telling the kids the other day about, remember the TV program Towards 2000?
Yes.
It was all about,
documentary of future
inventions and things. And then they changed it to Beyond 2000.
That's right.
It's like we are in the future.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, here we are in the future, and we're going to be talking about the prophet Isaiah.
I think we just showed our age there,
I think we did. Anyway, that's why I was trying to move on, Matt.
Where are we up to?
We're on to someone else who's been speaking into the future, Isaiah.
Yeah, that's right.
And we are Thrive Deeper, episode 162. And we're picking up our journey through the book of Isaiah. And in our last episode, we got up to Isaiah chapter 29. And of course, background again for Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet who lived in Jerusalem in the latter part of the two kingdom period, where Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And his prophetic words were largely to the Jerusalem people and the leaders of Judah, but also spoke to what was happening in Israel as well. And as we've journeyed through, we've seen Isaiah talk a lot about and prophesy a lot about the judgment that was coming on Israel and then subsequently to come on Judah. But interlaced with these incredible passages also of great hope for the future. And as we ended in Isaiah 29, we saw again through Isaiah, God was warning the people that there would be a military crisis and judgment coming upon Jerusalem. And this was because of the people's kind of spiritual insensitivity, their religious hypocrisy, their unwillingness to really trust their destiny to God. They wanted to take matters into their own hands. And so Isaiah's, again, prophesying into the future of what judgment will be. And we see a number of oracles of Isaiah as we work through these books as he looks at not just the judgment on Jerusalem and Judah, but also on the surrounding nations. So let's kick in at Isaiah 30.
Yeah, chapter 30. At this stage, it's evident there's a fairly strong historical background to this material. Evidently, Assyria, this is kind of crisis time we get to now, really, once we're up to chapter 30. Evidently, the Assyrians have pretty much destroyed everything. No one's been able to stand against the Assyrians. This is a crisis moment now. And it seems that what has happened, because Isaiah here starts the chapter, "Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge." This is a big theme throughout the book, isn't it, Stu?
Yeah,
like this theme of who are you going to trust? In a way, as I've gone through this whole first half of Isaiah, which is Isaiah 1 to 39, which is pretty much a clean block. Yeah. That is the consistent message through the whole thing. Even the stuff about idolatry really is about who are you trusting in?
Yes.
Because they're feeling like, we really need to keep these local deities happy, and now the big issue is foreign alliances. And you can see why they feel they need this, because you've got these smaller nation states just toppling one after another. Yeah. And the Assyrian tsunami, so to speak, is bearing down upon you. It's interesting that, though, here, given that there is such a strong historical background to these oracles, that he doesn't actually mention Hezekiah. Hezekiah, who is the king right now, isn't the one necessarily rebuked. A good guess for why that may be is that probably Hezekiah's officials, there's probably been a bit of a disagreement. And you wouldn't look, Hezekiah's certainly not depicted as the ideal king, as we'll see a little further on. He's far from it. I mean, he has but overall, the assessment that is given of him in Kings and Chronicles is positive assessment. He is a man of faith, of course, with lapses of faith, and you wouldn't put it beyond him to have a lapse of faith at this point. But it's interesting that he's not He's actually not
that's a good
mentioned.
point.
And often the kings are called to account really here. But it may be that his officials have actually sent off envoys. Because the fact that he says, woe to the obstinate children, there's this sense where the king is like the father of the nation and the kids have rebelled. I think that may be what's going on here. So they've sent these envoys off.
To Egypt?
Yeah, to Egypt. This is a big problem because in moments of crisis, the first thing God wants us to do is to come to him and consult him. God, what do you want us to do here? And no doubt, and you get the sense that they've also had some false prophets.
Yes.
In the background, just saying, do that. Egypt is going to save you or whatever. Because that's certainly a theme.
That's a theme
there,
as well.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So that's behind this oracle, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit. And they down in it's interesting, Stu, down in verse 7, he has this oracle here, which is directed to Egypt, and I quote, "Whose help is utterly useless. Therefore I call her Rahab, the do nothing." Rahab is sort of this mythical kind of creature associated with the forces of chaos, the ultimate kind of power, and Egypt is kind of associated, with Rahab. But now he's saying no, they're going to be Rahab, the do nothing, and that's exactly. Egypt proves completely useless in this situation. In fact, Egypt is referred to as a splintered staff that's going to injure the one that leans on it. And that's pretty much what happens.
By the Assyrians, actually, were the ones who made that declaration about Egypt. So they knew, they could see that in Egypt themselves.
That's exactly right. So that's what they end up being. And again, you've got this promise here, and it's interesting, Stu, because what God promises now in the light of this impending disaster is actually exactly what happens. And we're going to revisit that amazing story of the siege of Jerusalem. In Hezekiah's time, that is told in Kings and Chronicles. But it's really interesting to look at it in the light of Isaiah, and particularly Isaiah's prophecies. And even the fact that Isaiah promises here, he says in verse 18 of chapter 30, "Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you, therefore he will rise up and show you compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him." He says...
and it's kind of right in the middle of this massive kind of oracle on destruction, really, and fleeing, and then there's this one verse in our context that kind of says, but hey, all you have to do, God's waiting.
That's right.
To show his mercy and his compassion.
It's so beautiful. Verse 19, "People of Zion who live in Jerusalem, you will weep no more. How gracious he will be when you cry for help. As soon as he hears, he will answer you." Now, as we'll see, that's exactly what happens when Hezekiah pulls himself together, having already once paid off the... Now, we're not sure exactly where this sits. This may be just before that.
Yes.
This may be while they're still coming. But certainly he pays them off first. We know that. And then they withdraw.
And come back.
But then that doesn't work, comes back. So he certainly has these lapses of faith because, we're told that he strips the temple and all of this, and he takes all of the gold out of there and he gives it all to the king of Assyria, which is like this symbolic, that's what we know from the Book of Kings.
It's like paying tribute, really.
Yeah, he's paying tribute,
Will become a subject to...
But at such great cost. And even the symbolism of stripping the temple of its gold to give to this king, when God is saying... Guys, I'll help you. As soon as you call, I'll answer you. And it's interesting that his lapse of faith doesn't disqualify him from when he does.
No, that's right.
It's like that they come back, and then he cries out to God, and God doesn't, because you'd expect God to say, well, hey, I gave you the opportunity, but hey, you missed it, so off you go. That's our God is not a God that does that. And it's so beautifully portrayed in this story. Through Hezekiah's lapses of faith.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can often do too. Oh, I can't go to God now. I can't go back to God now. I've left it to this point, or I've done all these things, and God's not going to accept me now, but He will, and He's sitting there waiting. And as we see here, it's if only you would, then I will.
Yes, strong language here because God promises that he's going to destroy Assyria, which of course, as we know, he does in one big swoop. he says, the voice of the Lord will shatter Assyria. He will, with his rod, he will strike them down. And he goes on to say, interesting language here, says, Topheth has long been prepared. Topheth is a spot in the valley of Ben Hinnom where sacrifices actually, where a lot of child sacrifices were made. And the valley of Ben Hinnom, the valley of Gehenna, as it's known also, is the word Gehenna becomes the word actually that's used essentially for hell.
Oh, right.
And Topheth is like is kind of like the center point there. So Topheth has long been prepared. It has been made ready for the king. Its fire pit has been made deep and wide with an abundance of fire and with the breath of the Lord, like a stream of burning sulfur sets it ablaze. So you start getting that kind of imagery and that sort of apocalyptic judgment imagery that's associated with hell. Again, that's symbolic imagery. Let's get rid of all the Greek mythology and stuff that has been added to sort of this idea of judgment. But yeah, certainly this idea of fire and burning sulfur and associated with the judgment of God, really that starts with in Isaiah. He goes back to this Egypt thing. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots, in the great strength of their horsemen. Interestingly, in Deuteronomy, in the law for kings were forbidden. They were forbidden that the sort of the luxury of having lots of horses and the large cavalry and so you think why would this be? And it's and again God wants them to trust in Him.
Yeah, dependence.
And it's a theme in the Psalms, that trusting in strong horses and so forth. And so it's interesting that Jesus, in the light of that, the king should not amass many war horses and so forth. That when Jesus rides into Jerusalem, he doesn't come on a war horse because that procession is a very Roman sort of thing. They knew that from the Roman Empire, but they would ride in on their war horses. So you have Jesus riding in procession, but he's on a donkey. So he's keeping this this law of Deuteronomy in that sense. But here, here they're relying on the horses and the chariots of Egypt. And so you get this picture of them just turning the wrong way in their crisis. And, crises can be moments where we can profoundly experience God's faithfulness, which eventually happens, but it's, it's not for a while here.
And you can understand, I mean, these guys were fearful. I mean, it's easy for us to look back now and go, oh, what's wrong with them? But, how many times have we been in the place of perhaps fear or anxiety and tried everything else before we've actually gone and taken it to the Lord and kind of gone, hey. So you can understand where they're at, but again, with Isaiah speaking into this and saying, turn back to the one who can save you, the people just wouldn't listen.
Of course, interestingly here, it's too, Stu, in the light of Hezekiah's sort of lapses of faith. Hezekiah would have been the one that they would have understood as being the fulfillment of Isaiah 7:14. The virgin or the young woman will give birth to a child, and he will be called Emmanuel, God with us. That child would have been child to the royal household, most probably Hezekiah, and certainly probably would have been understood to have been Hezekiah. But Hezekiah doesn't. In a way, Hezekiah and Hezekiah's faith and what God does through Hezekiah, this salvation and this amazing demonstration that God is with his people, that's certainly in Hezekiah's time, that gets demonstrated. And yet Hezekiah is not quite the ideal king. So you get these at the start of 32 here, and it says, see, a king will reign in righteousness.
Well, just before we move on, at the end of 31, obviously that's where he talks, again, that message of hope, where Isaiah talks about the fact that Assyria is going to fall and God is going to judge Assyria. And so, again, interspersed between these oracles of kind of judgment, there's this return to the one the Israelites have greatly rebelled against, for on that day each one will reject the silver and the gold, the idols that your own hands have sinfully made, and then Assyria will fall. It
says by no human sword. I mean, this is an interesting prediction. Then they're going to fall, but
so we're not going to win in victory.
A sword not of mortals will devour them. Now, again, that's exactly what happens. So there is this view, classic feature of the book of Isaiah throughout, this sort of double kind of view, this classic prophetic view where you're looking at a historical circumstance, but the situation becomes symbolic of something beyond that.
Yeah.
It's a, of course, where I think you pointed out in a previous episode, the way we view time, is different to the way God views time. And there's a sense in which the prophetic view matches God's view in that like events can be conflated together.
Yes.
Moments of great salvation can symbolize times up in the future, and so you have
prophecy. You have prophecy to the imminent future, but you also have prophetic word into the distant future.
Yeah, but the imminent future stands as a sort of prefiguration of the distant
what's
future
going to come.
And so Hezekiah as a king sort of prefigures an ultimate ideal king, and this is a big theme right through the book of Isaiah, is this ideal king that's going to come, and so you get this here again, and he points to this time of salvation, and he says, "Then the eyes of those who see will no longer be closed, and the ears of those who hear will listen. The fearful heart will know and understand. The stammering tongue will be fluent and clear." And so this is a reversal of what was prophesied earlier about, they will be ever hearing but never, in Isaiah chapter 6, where he says the result of your ministry is actually going to be the hardening of hearts and the closing of eyes.
No one's going to listen. Yep.
That's right. But this is pointing to a time actually, and this is where I think this is pointing to a time beyond even this time, because this is a time when the eyes of those who see will no longer be closed. And so it's pointing beyond that particular
and we're at Isaiah 32 now, listeners, just for where we're up to. Just we're sort of working through just the start of Isaiah 32. And then he goes into this passage where he's kind of speaking, stand up, you complacent women, listen to me. He's really looking for the people to mourn what's going to come. It sort of changes back to perhaps the imminent future, and it's like the sense of mourning, the loss that's coming.
It may well be that the actual background to this is that there's perhaps a harvest festival, and they're all celebrating, having a great time.
Right.
And Isaiah is saying, what are you doing? Within a year, you're going to be, disaster is bearing down upon us.
Yeah.
So come on, we should be repenting and mourning here. So that's a bit of a picture of
So this
of the
is now,
situation.
this bit in the narrative here is now after the initial where God has defeated the Assyrians.
Yeah.
So this is in this year beyond that, really before ultimately Judah does fall. So this is kind of the sense of it's coming still, even though God has restored in the imminent. So
the timing is of these oracles. It sort of jumps back and forwards a little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
In chapter 33, we're probably in a time after he's now paid off the Assyrians.
Yep.
They have withdrawn, but that's not quite the answer.
No.
They're going to come back. And so Isaiah brings these prophecies against Assyria, saying again, the Lord be gracious to you, we long for you, but be our strength every morning, our salvation in times of distress.
That's kind of a model prayer, really, isn't it? He's kind of really trying to say, people, this is what we should be doing, and models this prayer for the people at the same time as this warning against the destroyer that God has appointed to come, the Assyrians, to say, you're destined for destruction as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they do come back. This is the thing. They don't. They're paid off an enormous amount. I mean, that they are. It's an enormous act of betrayal in one sense, because they have. And this is what he says here: "Woe to you, destroyer! You who have not been destroyed. Woe to you, betrayer! You who have not been betrayed."
Yeah.
When you stop destroying, you'll be destroyed. When you stop betraying, you'll be betrayed. And the idea here is that they have received all of this massive payoff, but they just come back. It's all a complete lie.
Now, whereabouts in King? If people want to refer back to that story where where that happened. Matt, have you got that handy? I haven't got that in front of me. There in Kings.
2 Kings 18, 19.
18, 19 and 20, somewhere around there on yours. Great.
So they do come back, and there are these oracles against, in preparation, Isaiah is bringing these oracles against not only Assyria, but the nations. So there is this reminder, almost just as they're on their way. In chapters 34 and 35, there are, again, this reminder that God is sovereign over all of the nations.
Yeah.
This is a God who is completely sovereign over world powers. And they're going to need to know this as this army's marching down on them, that we're trusting in a God here who is completely sovereign over this situation. Because it would have been, a formidable force and absolutely, absolutely terrifying. But the sense that you get here is that there's something way more terrifying than them. And that is, and that is the vengeance of God, the judgment of God. And so this is depicted in apocalyptic language. All the stars in the sky will be dissolved, the heavens rolled up like a scroll, all the starry hosts will fall, like withered leaves. I mean, this classic apocalyptic language that describes the fall of kingdoms.
Right.
So again, it's important to note this is not describing, when this sort of language is used, it's not describing the end of the space-time universe as such.
Right. Okay.
It's describing, it's describing in apocalyptic terms the catastrophe of the fall of nations. And again, I think in a way this is the fall of these nations. Again, with that double view of Isaiah, there is this looking forward to the ultimate destruction of the anti-God world system, as such, and so that's where. So you don't think, Matt,
in that little bit there, particularly all the heavenly bodies will the skies will roll up? Because reading then into the beginning of chapter 34, verse 5, when my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens, you don't think there's some spiritual opposition potentially to God's direction here in terms of rescuing his people, where there's a bit of a battle going on in the heavenlies as well, and this is kind of Isaiah recognizing that through this prophecy, possibly?
Absolutely. I think that's the case, and that's where this bigger view is important, because in the book of Revelation, the Babylon, when the prophecy is, or the declaration that Babylon has fallen, it talks about Babylon as being a haunt for evil spirits, and so you can sense that it's pictured very much in those spiritual terms.
So this isn't just a battle in worldly sense. This is a much bigger battle.
As Paul says in Ephesians 6, battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers. And
so this isn't just God intervening at a kind of a human level. There's a whole spiritual
there's a whole spiritual dimension, and that almost would have been assumed in this, in this context, because wars are understood as being gods against gods.
God.
Now, we should hasten to say that throughout the Old Testament, God is completely distinguished from these other gods who are sort of these territorial spirits. And in fact, it's said even through Isaiah, they're not gods at all. They're actually nothing. And in fact, the idols, they're just pieces of wood. They're empty pieces of wood. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily deny the fact that there is a spiritual realm, and there is a kind of spiritual struggle in some sense. But they're not the ones that you're struggling. They're not gods.
No,
that's the key thing. They're not gods. They don't have that. They don't have that power. Now, again, it doesn't address it in any depth. But yes, I think it is sitting behind here, and certainly in this bigger view, Isaiah is predicting a judgment that is a cosmic judgment, essentially. Yeah. And so that I think is behind why that language is actually used. All the stars in the sky will be dissolved and the heavens rolled up like a scroll. So the stars are often associated with spiritual beings in the ancient world. And so there's this sense of, like often this language, stars falling from the sky is also used in Isaiah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think that's an allusion to sort of that spiritual element. It's interesting too that in the second part of chapter 34 has this sense of, the kingdoms of the earth now become inhabited by animals, and this, the sense there, the desert owl and the screech owl will possess it, the great owl and the raven will nest there, and the idea, that's depicting how desolate it will actually become. But there's almost this sense here that you people have been found unworthy to dwell in the land. I'm going to bring in,
the worthy
creatures
animals
that are worthy, that are way more worthy than you,
Yep.
and they're going to live in your kingdom, in your place.
Yeah,
you know, in the light of the sort of creation picture of Genesis chapter 1, that the animals replacing humans there is a powerful picture of judgment.
And even towards the end of that, it's very specific. Not one of them will be missing, none will be lacking its mate, because he has ordered it by my mouth, and he will gather them by his spirit. He's talking about the animals here, the birds and the likes. So Edom, the judgment of Edom, which is mentioned here, is really about the judgment of the nations. Really, that's what's being referred to here. Yeah,
the significance of Edom too. They're the descendants of Esau, and the conflict between Esau and Jacob is a picture that runs right through the Bible. So you sense Edom gets a bit of they get the rough end of the stick in prophecy. I mean, they really do. But it's also partly what they symbolize. So, Romans chapter 9, which, Paul quotes the verse in Malachi, which says, Jacob I've loved, but Esau I've hated. And in Malachi, where it says that, Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated, he's not talking about individual people. He's talking about nations and particularly what those nations stand for. So Jacob is the symbol of, is God's covenant people, and in that context, and Esau is this symbol of the nations kind of opposing them. So that's why you I think Edom is, but also the fact that Edom was an arch enemy as well. In a very important way. Interestingly, too, I mean, the land of Eden, talk about being inhabited by, and I've said this before, inhabited by animals. Of course, the key area in Edom is what is now Petra, which is basically, it's one of the most amazing places I've ever been in all of my travel. It's like this city of tombs built into the mountain. It's a hauntingly beautiful place, but it's quite hauntingly so,
right.
Because it's all of these ruins and these tombs built just all over the place. It's like this, as it's the city of the dead. It really is an amazing place.
Wow.
And so whenever I read those prophecies, I think, man, as I've walked through Petra, you think, this is exactly how it ended up. In chapter 35, and this is the chapter that leads into this amazing story that sort of finishes this first half of the book of Isaiah, in which all of this prophetic material is really vindicated in a very powerful way. Again here you get these promises when God's people turn to Him. There's going to be these amazing things are going to happen. And it says down in verse 5, it says, again, like in the previous chapter, then the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, the lame will leap like a deer, the mute tongue will shout for joy. I don't know if you remember in Matthew chapter 11, there's an account of when John the Baptist is in prison and he's a little confused about whether is Jesus really the Messiah, or is he not? We don't quite know what's going on with John the Baptist, but he does send his disciples to Jesus to ask, "Are you the one who was to come?" Which is interesting in the light of the fact that previously John the Baptist was quite sure.
Yes. Yeah.
But now he's just not quite sure because, as was the case with everyone, Jesus wasn't quite the Messiah
that they expected,
that anyone really expected. And so Jesus quotes this verse. This is what, in this sort of veiled kind of answer, cryptic answer, he says, "Go and report to John. The eyes of the blind are open, the deaf hear." And he quotes this verse in Isaiah because, of course, Isaiah is predicting a time again beyond just this, when God will, dramatically bring an act of salvation and a defeat of God's enemies, in a way very similar to what He did in the time of Hezekiah. In one night, bang, the enemy is decisively defeated by the sword of the angel of the Lord. But in Christ's case, of course, it was on that that one Good Friday night. That's when it was actually He was the one that suffered the sword in our place.
Yes.
So, amazing links. I just find all these amazing links, with Isaiah and the New Testament. And of course, Isaiah's, quoted from more than just about anything else in the New Testament. So we come now, Stu, to chapter 36 and the story of Sennacherib's attack on Jerusalem.
Yep.
Comes Sennacherib, is the
Assyrian.
The Assyrian who comes up against the walls of Jerusalem and lays siege to the city. This event is so significant for the history of Israel. It's recorded here in Isaiah, and there's a good reason why it's recorded here in Isaiah as well. It's recorded in Kings, it's recorded in Chronicles. There's also possibly an allusion to this in Herodotus, the famous ancient Greek historian, records a part of Egyptian history that alludes to this moment when all the armies came up against and such went into the temple and prayed, and then there was a plague of mice or something, he says. Okay. And I think it's sort of a garbled version of this because he ascribes it to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians went to the Egyptian temple, and not quite. But, now of course, Herodotus is writing about this much later. So a lot of people think that that's a sort of a garbled version of this event. What's interesting about this, and we covered this in our episode on Kings, we covered this to some extent. The importance of this being included in Isaiah is because Isaiah is the prophet at the time. He, in fact, in Chronicles, when the chronicler is chronicling these events, he footnotes. He says all these other things are recorded in the book of Isaiah, essentially the writings of Isaiah. So Isaiah is the one really or Isaiah's scribe is the one that's keeping record of all of these events.
Yes.
So the writer of Kings and the writer of Chronicles are probably getting this from these records that have been kept. But for Isaiah, this is the ultimate vindication of everything that he's been saying. This is why this is recorded here, because it fulfills everything that Isaiah has talked about, which is important because in this whole second half of Isaiah is going to be speaking to the exiles, and we'll talk about that, how that can be in the next episode. But he's pointing to a time further future again.
Yes.
And it's like, well, how can we know that such an impossible act of deliverance could happen? Yeah.
Because it's happened here.
Because it's happened here, so that it's like the whole trajectory of the first part of Isaiah culminating in this amazing event of the destruction of the Assyrians, no less. I mean, goodness, in a way sets up for the whole second half of the book of Isaiah. So Sennacherib comes with his army.
So just before we jump in there, just a point to note, because I got a little confused when I was reading through 36, 37, then 38, 39.
Yeah.
The 36 starts with in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, and you might recall from our study through the book of Kings.
People will have memorized that.
Yeah. Hezekiah went and asked, he was told he was going to die of an illness, and we'll come to that later in Isaiah, and he went and God promised him 15 more years of life.
Yeah.
So we kind of know where this sits, and then the chapter 38 is basically the bit prior to this, where it recalls Hezekiah's illness.
So this is during this last 15 years.
That's correct, yeah. So it's in the
and there's a reason why it's narrated like that, in that order. We'll talk about that in a moment. But so Sennacherib comes up to the walls, and the speech of the field commander of Sennacherib, it's actually the field commander that comes to the walls, and the speech is interesting because it's very much like what Satan says, what the serpent says to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. Yeah. There's a striking similarity between this. This is where there's just something. There's something demonic about this in the way that it seems to allude to the very things that Isaiah has said. This seeks to undermine, like very deliberately and pointedly to undermine all of those things. Yep. Like, on what are you basing this confidence of yours? I mean, we've just had, 35 chapters of Isaiah saying, you can have confidence. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? Look, I know you are depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such is the Pharaoh king of Egypt and all who depend on it. So that's their weak link. Yep. So he's delivering that news. No, guys, I've got some news for you. Egypt's not coming. And that, again, for a lot of people in the city, Egypt hasn't come. We're done for. they would have, most people would have seen Egypt as their final hope. So here he is in their hearing, speaking Hebrew, mind you, as we learn later on, so that they can all understand, saying,
well, because there were lots of people from the general public, for want of a better word, in the walls listening to what was being, and he was trying to, it was kind of a bit of an act of terrorism. He was really trying to instill fear in the people so they would rebel against whatever the leaders said, even if the leaders decided to stay true to God's call. He was trying to get the people to rise up against.
Yeah, that's right.
But then he goes on to say in verse 7, where you were heading next,
if you say we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar? Now that is a really twisted. It's interesting because here's a situation where Hezekiah has done this.
Yes.
He's pulled down the altars of false gods. Well, false altars, but they were altars actually that some of the people would have been in high places, and some people would have thought this is the way we need to worship the Lord as well. And Hezekiah pulled those down because this is not the way that, and so he's appealing. And this is demonic appeal to the doubts that would have,
partial truth is almost more dangerous than an outright lie, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what he's kind of trying to do here, to some degree, perhaps,
Yeah, pulling down the altars of, even the altars of foreign gods. They would have thought, oh man, that would have instilled fear. Like, is God really going to save it from these gods? I mean, because they're really afraid. They're fearing Baal and Ashtoreth and these other gods. And here comes this Assyrians saying, hey, you're done for because Hezekiah pulled down all these altars. I mean, that really would have, and he's saying that this is the twist, these altars of God, of your God. Well, that just muddies the waters a bit there.
Well, because later he wants to say, and your God's commanded me to come and destroy you. It's like, that he gets to that a little later in this narrative.
Yeah, that's right. So he says, come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria, which is the exact thing that so many prophecies of Isaiah have been against. Don't make bargains with these nations, right? Don't compromise. The interesting thing is Hezekiah had already done that and they just came back. There was complete betrayal. Yeah. And then he says, I will give you 2,000 horses if you can put riders on them.
Just facetious
again,
kind of.
He's offering the very thing that the book of Deuteronomy 17 in the Charter for Kings says, kings shall not amass great numbers of horses. So he's saying, I'll give you this.
It's almost like, let's even this up a bit. I'll give you 2 if you can put riders on them, but even then you're not going to be able to defeat. Even if I gave you that, you're still not going to be able to defeat.
Yeah, that's right. Us. And then he says, the Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it, which again is this twisted, it's this demonic twisting of the truth, because Isaiah had described Assyria as a tool in the Lord's hand.
Yeah.
Maybe they had got wind of this.
And a bit like you said.
And had gone to their heads.
Yeah, possibly. And a bit like you said before, when Satan said to Eve, did not God say?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and of course the Assyrians are castigated for their pride. You have these oracles of Isaiah just going at their pride, saying, yes, you're a tool in my hand, but woe to that.
That's right.
Woe to that, the instrument of my judgment.
You think it's you who's making this happen. It's actually me. Yeah.
Whereas he's all, high and mighty here and saying, well, hey, the Lord, it's the Lord that told me to march against this country. And so again, it's this muddying of the water. He's going to appeal to their every doubts. He's just going to get in there and it's just, as I said, it's quite demonic. So he says, he then goes on to say, they say, hey, speak to us in Aramaic and not in the hearing of the people. But of course, the field commander keeps speaking Hebrew because he does want everyone, because fear is one of their main weapons, really. And then the commander goes on and he says, do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord. When he says, the Lord will surely deliver us, this city will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria. Of course, that's what Isaiah had been saying. And then, he says, do not listen to Isaiah, make peace with me, come out, with Hezekiah, sorry. Each of you will eat from the fruit of your own vine and fig tree and drink water from your own system until I come and take you to a land like your own. So it's this, listen to me and I'll come and take, it's got this Genesis 3, they were cast out of the garden. It's the very reverse. The promised land was to be a kind of a new provisional Garden of Eden space, where God would dwell among his people. Make a deal with me. I'll
take you out.
I'll take you out to another land. It's a complete reversal of
God's plan
of everything. Yeah. So it's interesting the way that this is all.
And he warns
framed.
again not to listen to Hezekiah. Don't let him mislead you by saying the Lord will deliver us.
Yeah.
And then he makes the assumption: has any of the other gods of the nations delivered?
So this is the moment,
Yeah.
of course, when when Hezekiah, for all of his lapses of faith, and in a way, there's nothing else he can do really now anyway, apart from capitulate.
Yeah.
And give the city over to the Assyrian general. But Isaiah has been giving them these promises, and this shows that actually for once someone is actually listening to one of these prophets. And the point here is that when you do listen and you respond and you trust, amazing things happen.
Even through all of that
That's right.
period of disobedience and not listening, and at this one moment, as you say, that's all it takes is turn and face God, and he will respond.
Yeah, so he puts on sackcloth, which is this symbolic way of expressing repentance, and he goes into the temple of the Lord, and he sends the messengers to ask Isaiah to pray for them, and of course Isaiah sends the message that God is going to save them, and then we have again this a little bit more of this speech. Because this time Sennacherib sends a message to Hezekiah, king of Judah. So he sends a letter, and it says, do not let the God you depend on deceive you. So this is the rhetoric here is definitely escalating. Do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says Jerusalem will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria. Man, it's just like, now you actually, now he's actually attacking God and saying God is lying to you. This is not even twisting it anymore. This is just saying your God's lying to you. Oh man, like he's saying all these other nations have been destroyed. Their gods haven't been able to save them, and your God's going to be no better. I mean, this is just a direct challenge. So Hezekiah takes the letter into the temple. I love this imagery. Lays it out. But think of a scroll here. Lays this scroll of this letter out before the Lord, and Isaiah sends this message that they're going to be completely destroyed. And you have that the oracle against this amazing language, and he says ultimately he will not enter this city. This is an amazing prediction of Isaiah down in chapter 37, verse 33. It says he will not enter this city, talking about Sennacherib's army. He will not enter this city. He will not shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. That's the inevitable thing that they're waiting for. That's actually not going to happen.
Well, because they also declared that they were going to basically, earlier they'd said that you're going to eat your own feces and drink your own urine, because they were basically going to try to starve them out of the city, basically.
Yeah, that's right. By the way he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will defend the city, I will save it for my sake. That's the first thing. And for the sake of David, my servant. And what he means by that is because I made a promise and I keep my promises. And I made a promise way back then to David, and I'm going to keep this promise that when my people turn to me, that I would hear their prayer.
Yes.
And so we have this amazing verse, one of the most amazing verses in the Old Testament, I'd say, Stu, verse 36. Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. I mean, it's incredible verse. So Sennacherib withdraws and goes back, and it talks about his death because he goes into the God of his temple, and this is probably at some later stage. This probably could be a couple of decades later, because it doesn't give the time. In fact, it was a couple of decades later. And the idea of recording this is because when Hezekiah went into the temple of God, and God saved him. Yes. Sennacherib goes into the temple of his God, and he's struck down by his own sons. So that's where that finishes.
So let's see who's God really.
Yeah, that's
Sennacherib.
right. That's right. So moving forward quickly, Stu, and we'll finish with this this last section. So this actually goes in chronologically. This belongs earlier, but the point of putting this here is because the question that begs here is, but 100 years later, the people still went into exile. So why was that? If God's able to save, why did they still go into exile? And in a way, Hezekiah's illness is in a way symbolic, because God said to him, "You're going to die," but he prayed to God, and God said, I'll give you more time.
Yes.
Now, Isaiah had said he's going to destroy Israel and Judah. In the earlier prophecies, very much this sense of you've disobeyed me, judgment is coming.
Yes.
That was in the oracles, right? But they're spared from judgment, right?
Yes.
And they're spared from judgment for another 100 years. They're given another 100 years, basically sort of extra life in the land, so to speak. Because why? Because of what has just come before. Because they cried out to God, and God saved them from the Assyrians. And because of that act of deliverance, essentially they get up until around 600. This happens around 700 BC.
Yep.
Remember, we're working backwards because it's BC. And it's around 600 BC that you've got the Babylonian incursions, right? So they get another 100 years, very much like Hezekiah in a way. So this is Hezekiah's extension of life is similar in a way to their extension of life. Now, the interesting thing is one of the things that happens in Hezekiah's extension of life. Well, first of all, Manasseh's born.
Yes.
During that extension of life. And Manasseh's going to be the worst of all of the kings of Judah. But secondly, so yes, you get this act of deliverance in that time as well, which that's great. But also you get this, he's sort of courting the favor of the Babylonians. The Babylonians who are constantly in rebellion against the Assyria. They're a city-state within the Assyrian Empire.
And getting stronger.
They're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And there are waves of rebellion, right? And at one point, Marduk-Baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylon, says he sent Hezekiah letters and a gift. This is in chapter 39. Yep. Because if he'd heard of his illness and his recovery, right? So even though this happened earlier, this kind of portends the disaster that's coming in the slightly more distant future. Because Hezekiah, I mean, this is a great honor, really, for Hezekiah. He's thinking, man, the Babylonians, they sent me a letter and they're asking about my health. But of course, the Babylonians need all the support that they can get, right? Yeah. So they're buttering Hezekiah up because they need Hezekiah to help. Again, the territory where Israel actually is this key highway, very narrow strip of land between the Assyrian Empire and Egypt, right? Yes. So you need access. You need access and a bit of help from Hezekiah, even though by world standards at this stage, Hezekiah's kingdom was not at all powerful, but they did have a very strategic position. Yeah. So because of the strategic position, the king of Babylon sends these letters and sends envoys, right? Wow. This is an incredible proof. This really goes to Hezekiah's head at this stage. And in his pride, he shows them all the things in his palace. Look how good I am. And of course, when the Assyrians do come, of course, he has to strip the palaces and send all that. Yeah. But he is confronted by Isaiah, and Isaiah says, what did you show them? And he says, I showed them all these envoys, all the gold in my palace. Well, Isaiah says, a day will come when those very people, the Babylonians, are going to carry off. Yeah, so again, it's like, don't trust in these people. Yeah. Do not trust in these people because it's going to come back at you one day. And so, yet again, and to finish with this, Stu, it's in this moment where he feels, I've got Babylon on my side. I'm feeling really good. It's this, that is actually what causes this lapse of faith. It's this lapse into pride that really is going to become the downfall of the nation as a whole. And we see Hezekiah make this lapse here. And of course, God still saves him in the end. And that's when the Assyrians come, when he does cry, that doesn't disqualify him. But it just underscores the consistent message through this whole 39 chapters where God is pleading with this people. Just trust me. Don't trust other things. Trust me, and you will see that I am faithful.
Hi there, Thrive Deeper listeners. I just want to highlight that we have restarted our Thrive Perspectives podcast series. Over the next 4 to 5 episodes, Matt, myself, and our good friend and critical thinker Connell will be exploring our worldview and how this informs every aspect of our lives. How we think, behave, what we see as our priorities and purpose in life. This is such a timely conversation in this day and age with so many influences and voices shouting at us for our attention. What does a Christian worldview look like, and
How do we live out our lives in this context? So join us at Thrive Perspectives as we explore our Christian worldview. You can find the Perspectives podcast at our website, thrivetoday.tv, or at your favourite podcasting platform.